The patrol car's red and blue lights painted Sarah's tear-streaked face as she stood in handcuffs on her own driveway, her military duffel bag scattered across the concrete. 3 months of hell in Afghanistan, and this was her homecoming, arrested for trespassing in her own home while her smug neighbor filmed every humiliating second. But Margaret Whitmore had no idea that the quiet soldier she'd just destroyed was about to become her worst nightmare. Some battles aren't fought with bullets, they are fought the C-130 transport plane's engines wound down with a mechanical sigh that Sarah Martinez had been dreaming about for 93 days. Through the small porthole, she could see the familiar skyline of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, painted gold in the late afternoon sun. Her hands trembled slightly as she shouldered her duffel bag, not from fear this time, but from anticipation. "You okay, Sergeant?" asked Private Collins, a kid from Iowa who'd spent the entire flight home talking about his girlfriend's apple pie. Sarah managed a smile. "Just ready to sleep in my own bed." The irony wasn't lost on her. For 3 months, she'd shared a cramped forward operating base with 40 other soldiers, dodging mortars and navigating the political nightmare of training Afghan forces. Now, the thought of her quiet suburban home in Maplewood Estates felt like paradise. The bus ride from base to civilian life always felt surreal, like crossing between 2 different worlds. Sarah pressed her face against the window as familiar landmarks flashed by, the Dairy Queen where she'd had her first date with Mike, the high school where she'd been homecoming queen before trading her crown for combat boots, the small shopping center where she'd bought her wedding dress 6 years ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike, "Flight delayed in Chicago. Won't be home until tomorrow night. Sorry, babe. Love you." Sarah's heart sank. She'd been counting on falling into her husband's arms, on having him there to buffer her re-entry into civilian life. But Mike's job as a medical equipment salesman kept him traveling, and his schedule was as unpredictable as hers. The taxi dropped her off at 1247 Oakwood Drive just as the sun was setting. Sarah stood for a moment on the sidewalk, taking in the sight of her home. The grass was a little overgrown and someone had left a package on the porch, but it was exactly as she'd left it, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and the small American flag Mike had hung by the front door. She was fumbling for her keys when a sharp voice cut through the evening air. "Excuse me. What do you think you're doing?" Sarah turned to see a woman marching across the lawn from the house next door. She was in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of aggressive posture that suggested she'd never met a manager she hadn't demanded to speak to. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, genuinely confused. "You can't just walk up to someone's house like that. This is a private neighborhood." The woman's eyes narrowed as she took in Sarah's ACUs and duffel bag. "Are you some kind of a vagrant?" Sarah blinked. "I live here. This is my house." "That's impossible. The Martinez family lives here, and they are respectable people. Mr. Martinez specifically told me his wife was deployed overseas." The woman's voice dripped with disdain. "You're clearly some kind of imposter. I am Mrs. Martinez. I'm Sarah Martinez." Sarah's voice carried the patient tone she'd perfected dealing with difficult locals in Afghanistan. "I just got back from deployment." The woman, Sarah vaguely remembered Mike mentioning a problematic neighbor named Margaret, laughed coldly. "Mrs. Martinez is a petite blonde woman. You're obviously not her." Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She dealt with this before, the assumption that because she was Latina, she couldn't possibly belong in a neighborhood like Maplewood Estates. "Look, I just want to go inside my house," Sarah said, holding up her keys. "I've been traveling for 36 hours. Those could be stolen," Margaret snapped. "I'm calling the police." Please, don't you me." Margaret's voice rose to a shriek. "I know what you people do. You case neighborhoods, figure out when people are away, and then you break in. Well, not on my watch." Sarah's training kicked in. De-escalation. Find common ground. "I understand your concern for neighborhood security. That's actually admirable. But I can prove I live here. I have my military ID, my driver's license. Anyone can fake those," Margaret interrupted, already dialing 911. Yes, I need police. At 1247, Oakwood Drive. There's a suspicious person trying to break into the Martinez house. Yes, she appears to be Hispanic. No, she's claiming to be Mrs. Martinez, which is obviously a lie. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She'd survived IED attacks, firefights, and the constant stress of being one of only 3 women on a combat outpost. She could handle one racist neighbor. Officer, I'm reporting an attempted break-in, Margaret continued, her voice getting louder as if she were performing for an audience. The suspect is a Hispanic female, military-aged, carrying what appears to be military gear. Other neighbors were starting to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Sarah recognized a few faces, the elderly couple from across the street, the young family with twins from 2 doors down. They all looked confused, uncertain. Margaret, what's going on? Asked Jim Patterson, who lived across the street. Sarah had met him at a neighborhood barbecue before her deployment. This person is trying to break into the Martinez house, Margaret announced. She's claiming to be Sarah Martinez, which is obviously ridiculous. Jim looked at Sarah more carefully and recognition dawned on his face. That is Sarah Martinez, Margaret. I've met her several times. That's impossible, Margaret shot back. Sarah Martinez is blonde and petite. This is obviously some kind of scam. Sarah felt the familiar burn of anger in her chest. I'm not blonde because I'm Latina, Margaret. My married name is Martinez, but I was born Sarah Elena Vasquez. I grew up in San Antonio, joined the Army at 18, and met my husband Mike at Fort Benning. We've been married for 6 years and lived in this house for 3. Anyone could have researched that information, Margaret said dismissively. I'm not falling for this con game. The sound of sirens in the distance made Sarah's heart race. She'd called for backup plenty of times in Afghanistan, but this was different. This time, she wasn't sure if the police would see her as the victim or the threat. 2 patrol cars pulled up, their red and blue lights painting the gathering crowd in alternating colors. Sarah kept her hands visible and stayed perfectly still as 4 officers approached. We received a report of a break-in in progress, said the lead officer, a tall man with graying hair and sergeant stripes. Do you have identification? Yes, sir. Sarah slowly reached for her wallet, acutely aware that any sudden movement could escalate the situation. I'm Sergeant Sarah Martinez, currently on leave from the 82nd Airborne. This is my home. She handed over her military ID and driver's license. The officer examined them carefully, comparing the photo to her face. Officer, don't let her fool you, Margaret interjected. Those documents could be forged. I know the real Mrs. Martinez, and that's not her. The officer looked at Margaret with barely concealed annoyance. These documents appear to be legitimate. The address matches, and of course they look legitimate. These people are getting very sophisticated with their fake IDs. Margaret's voice was reaching a fever pitch. I'm telling you, the real Sarah Martinez is a blonde woman. This is clearly an imposter. Mrs. Whitmore, the officer said with forced patience, even if that were true, having fake ID isn't the same as attempted breaking and entering. If these are her keys and they opened the door, she could have stolen the keys. Margaret shrieked. She could have gotten them from the real Mrs. Martinez. Sarah watched the officer's expression change. The initial professionalism was giving way to something else, doubt, perhaps, or the kind of unconscious bias that she'd learned to recognize in 100 different situations. I'm going to need you to step back from the door, the officer said to Sarah. We need to verify your identity before we can let you enter the premises. I've shown you my ID, Sarah said, her voice calm despite the rage building inside her. I've given you my name, my unit, my deployment history. What more do you need? We need to contact your husband to verify your identity, the officer said. Mrs. Whitmore says he told her his wife was deployed, and we need to confirm that you're actually that person. Sarah's heart sank. Mike was somewhere over the Midwest, probably with his phone off during the flight. Even if they could reach him, how long would that take? How long would she have to stand here like a criminal in front of her own home? Officers, Jim Patterson called out, I can vouch for her. I've met Mrs. Martinez several times. This is definitely her. I appreciate that, sir, the officer replied, but we need to follow protocol. Mrs. Whitmore is a respected member of this community and she's filed a formal complaint. A respected member who's clearly having some kind of mental episode, muttered another neighbor, but not loud enough for the police to hear. Margaret, meanwhile, had pulled out her phone and was now filming everything. I'm documenting this for the neighborhood watch, she announced. People need to see what happens when we stay vigilant. Sarah felt the familiar. Sarah Martinez had been awake since 4 a.m., not because she couldn't sleep, but because she had work to do. The kind of work that required absolute precision and perfect timing. At 7 a.m. sharp, she knocked on the door of 1251 Oakwood Drive, the house directly across from Margaret Whitmore's. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, 83 years old and sharp as a tack, answered the door in her housecoat. Mrs. Martinez. Oh, my dear, I saw what happened on the news. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about Margaret Whitmore. Eleanor's expression darkened. That woman. Come in, dear. We need to talk. Over coffee and homemade cookies, Eleanor Hayes revealed the neighborhood's worst-kept secret. Margaret's been terrorizing this street for years, Eleanor said. She calls the city on everyone. She got the Johnsons fined for their fence being 2 inches too high. She reported the Patels for excessive cooking odors, can you believe that? She even called animal control on my cat for being an outdoor nuisance. Why hasn't anyone complained? Who complains about the complainer? Besides, she's sneaky about it. Always makes it seem like she's just concerned about property values or neighborhood safety. Sarah leaned forward. Mrs. Hayes, would you be willing to make a statement about Margaret's pattern of harassment? Honey, I'd be delighted. But there's something else you should know. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. I think she's been watching your house. What do you mean? Before you deployed, I'd see her at her window with binoculars, taking pictures of your yard, your visitors. She keeps a notebook, I've seen her writing in it when people come and go from your house. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. How long has this been going on? Since you moved in. Maybe longer. Margaret doesn't like change, and she especially doesn't like people who don't fit her idea of what this neighborhood should look like. An hour later, Sarah was on the phone with Detective Kowalski. Detective, I need to report a possible stalking situation. What kind of stalking? My neighbor has been conducting surveillance on my home for over 2 years. Taking photographs. Keeping records of my activities and visitors. That's concerning. Do you have evidence? I have a witness who's observed the behavior. I also suspect she may have been intercepting mail or packages. Why do you think that? Sarah pulled out a stack of delivery notifications from her phone. I've been tracking missing packages for months. Items that show as delivered but never arrived. Amazon, UPS, FedEx, always when my husband and I were both away. You think she was stealing your mail? I think she was building a case. Learning our routines, our finances, our personal information. The woman who called the police on me wasn't acting on impulse, detective. This was premeditated. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. A search warrant for Margaret's home, executed at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, revealed the full scope of her obsession. In a spare bedroom, police found what could only be described as a surveillance center. Photos of Sarah's house taken from multiple angles. A detailed log of comings and goings, noting times, dates, and descriptions of visitors. Copies of mail and packages that had been opened and resealed. Financial documents, credit reports, even medical information that had clearly been obtained illegally. But the most damning evidence was Margaret's journal, 3 years of handwritten entries documenting her growing fixation on Sarah Martinez. The new neighbors moved in today. Hispanic couple. Property values will definitely suffer. The woman works irregular hours. Possibly involved in criminal activity. Need to investigate. Confirmed military deployment. House will be vulnerable. Husband travels frequently for work. Intercepted medical records. No children. Probably can't have them. Natural selection at work. Planning return from deployment. Perfect opportunity to expose her true nature. Detective Kowalski called Sarah with the results. Mrs. Martinez, we've got her dead to rights on stalking, mail theft, identity theft, and about 6 other charges. This woman has been obsessed with you for years. How obsessed? She had blueprints of your house. Somehow got hold of the original construction plans. She knew your daily routine better than most married couples know each other's. This goes way beyond neighborhood watch. The federal charges were filed that afternoon. Mail theft and identity theft were federal crimes, carrying potential sentences of 20 years in prison. Combined with the original civil rights charges. And the HOA embezzlement, Margaret Whitmore was looking at the rest of her life behind bars. But Sarah wasn't done. At 6 p.m., she knocked on Margaret's front door. Through the glass, she could see Margaret in her living room, surrounded by legal documents and empty wine bottles. Go away. Margaret screamed without opening the door. I'm not talking to you. You don't have to talk, Sarah said calmly. You just have to listen. I said go away. The FBI raided your house today, Margaret. They found everything. The photos, the stolen mail, the medical records you had no right to see. Silence from inside the house. You've been watching me for 3 years. Planning this moment. Building a case against me in your sick little mind. Sarah's voice carried easily through the door. But you made one crucial mistake. What? Margaret's voice was muffled but audible. You thought I was weak. You thought I was just another victim you could bully and intimidate. Sarah smiled, though Margaret couldn't see it. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The door opened suddenly. Margaret stood there, wild-eyed and desperate. You've destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure everyone could see what you really are. I was protecting this neighborhood. From what? From people like me. From Latinos. From anyone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable. Margaret's face twisted with rage. This used to be a good neighborhood. Safe. Now it's full of people who don't belong here. People like me, you mean? Combat veterans. People who've served their country. You people come in here with your attitudes, your entitlement, my entitlement. Sarah's laugh was sharp. I earned my place here, Margaret. I bled for it. What have you done except steal from your neighbors? And terrorize anyone who threatens your sad little world? Margaret lunged forward, her hands reaching for Sarah's throat. But Sarah was ready. 3 years of combat training and 2 deployments had taught her how to handle desperate people. She stepped aside, caught Margaret's wrist, and in one fluid motion, had her face down on the porch with her arm twisted behind her back. Get off me! Margaret screamed. Help! Someone help me! Several neighbors had emerged from their houses at the sound of the commotion. Jim Patterson was already calling 911 assault. Margaret shrieked. She's assaulting me. You attacked me, Sarah said calmly, maintaining the restraint hold. I'm defending myself. You destroyed everything. My family, my home, my reputation. You've ruined me. You ruined yourself the moment you decided I didn't belong here. The police arrived within minutes. The same officers who had arrested Sarah 5 days earlier now found themselves arresting Margaret Whitmore for assault. As they loaded her into the patrol car, Margaret's voice carried across the street, "This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over." But it was over. Sarah knew it, and somewhere deep down, Margaret knew it too. The next morning brought the final revelation. David Chen called Sarah with news that made everything else pale in comparison. Sarah, you need to sit down for this. What is it? Margaret Whitmore isn't who she claims to be. What do you mean? Her real name is Margaret Ann Sullivan. She's wanted in Florida for fraud and embezzlement. She fled the state 3 years ago after stealing $200,000 from a children's charity she was managing. Sarah felt the world tilt. She's a fugitive. She's been living under a false identity for years. The Whitmore name came from a dead woman in Pennsylvania. Margaret Sullivan is a career criminal who's been running cons for over a decade. How did you find this out? The FBI ran her fingerprints when they arrested her. The match came back this morning. She's facing federal charges in 3 different states. Sarah sank into her chair. She's been running from the law this whole time. And using your neighborhood as her hiding place. The irony is beautiful, isn't it? She calls you a criminal while she's literally a fugitive from justice. The arrest made national news. The story of the racist neighbor who turned out to be a wanted criminal was too perfect for the media to ignore. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they all picked up the story. Margaret Sullivan, also known as Margaret Whitmore, was arrested yesterday in North Carolina, reported Anderson Cooper. Sullivan, who gained notoriety for having a decorated combat veteran arrested for allegedly trying to break into her own home, is now facing federal charges in multiple states for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. The segment included interviews with her victims in Florida, families whose children had suffered because Margaret had stolen money meant for cancer treatment and educational programs. She seemed so sincere, said Maria Gonzalez, whose daughter had lost a scholarship because of Margaret's theft. She talked about helping kids, about making a difference. We trusted her. Sarah watched the coverage from her living room, Mike's arm around her shoulders. The irony was overwhelming. Margaret had tried to destroy Sarah by painting her as a criminal, only to be exposed as an. The fluorescent lights in the Maplewood police station interrogation room buzzed with the same mechanical persistence as the generators at FOB Chapman. Sarah sat in the metal chair, still in her ACUs, still smelling like 3 different airports. And 36 hours of travel. The handcuffs were gone, but red marks circled her wrists like accusations. Detective Ray Kowalski had been a cop for 23 years, and he'd seen enough false arrests to recognize one when it walked through his door. The woman across from him had the bearing of a soldier, straight spine, steady gaze, hands folded. But ready. Her military ID had checked out immediately, her story was consistent, and her service record was impeccable. Sergeant Martinez, he said, sliding a cup of coffee across the table, I owe you an apology. Sarah accepted the coffee but didn't drink it. Is that your official statement, detective? My official statement is that you're free to go. The charges have been dropped and we're arranging for transportation back to your home. Kowalski sat down across from her, his expression grim. But off the record. What happened to you tonight was wrong. Dead wrong. Off the record doesn't help. My record, Sarah replied. I was arrested, photographed, fingerprinted, and held for 6 hours because a racist neighbor decided I couldn't possibly live in her precious neighborhood. We've spoken to your husband. He's flying back from Chicago as we speak. He's not happy. Sarah allowed herself a bitter smile. Mike's about as mild-mannered as they come, detective. If he's unhappy, then you've really screwed up. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, Margaret Whitmore was discovering that her moment of triumph was rapidly turning into something else entirely. She'd spent the evening calling friends, posting on the neighborhood Facebook group, and generally basking in the glow of her own righteousness. The story had been perfect in her mind, concerned neighbor protects community from dangerous criminal. But then the phone calls started coming. Margaret, what the hell did you do? Jim Patterson's voice was sharp with anger. That was actually Sarah Martinez. The real Sarah Martinez. I've talked to her husband and she's been detained for 6 hours because of your insane accusations. That's impossible, Margaret said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. I know what I saw. What you saw was a Latina woman and you assumed she was a criminal. Jesus Christ, Margaret, she's a decorated combat veteran. She's been in Afghanistan for 3 months. But she doesn't look like what? Like your fantasy of what a military wife should look like. Jim's voice was rising. You've lived next door to these people for 2 years and you've never actually talked to Sarah, have you? Margaret's silence was answer enough. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand the legal trouble you're in? False police report, filing a false complaint, possible hate crime charges, hate crime. Margaret's voice cracked. I'm not a racist. I was protecting the neighborhood. From what? A woman coming home from war. The line went dead. Margaret stared at her phone, a cold dread settling in her stomach. She quickly opened Facebook, looking for the supportive comments she'd been receiving all evening. Instead, she found a very different conversation taking place. Margaret Whitmore should be ashamed of herself, wrote Jennifer Chen from Maple Street. Sarah Martinez is a hero who's been serving our country while Margaret's been playing HOA police. I can't believe this happened in our neighborhood, added Marcus Williams. We are better than this. Or at least we should be. Anyone who knows Sarah knows she's the real deal, commented Lisa Rodriguez. She helped my family when my husband was deployed. She's a good person and a good neighbor. Margaret's hands shook as she scrolled through comment after comment, watching her social media world turn against her. She started typing responses, trying to explain, trying to justify, but each attempt only made things worse. Back at the police station, Sarah was finally being released. Detective Kowalski walked her to the lobby, where a small crowd had gathered. Mike Martinez stood near the front desk, still in his rumpled business suit, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Sarah. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms. God, I'm so sorry. I should have been there. It's not your fault, Sarah said, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with airplane air. You couldn't have known. The hell, it's not my fault. I left my wife to deal with that psychopath alone. Mike's voice carried across the lobby. And you, he said, turning to the desk sergeant, you arrested a decorated combat veteran for trying to enter her own home. Do you have any idea how badly you've screwed up? Jim Patterson stepped forward, looking embarrassed. Sarah, Mike. I'm so sorry. I tried to tell them who you were, but you did what you could, Jim, Sarah said. Thank you for calling Mike. What I should have done is gotten between you and that crazy woman before any of this started. Detective Kowalski cleared his throat. Mr. Martinez, we understand you're upset. The department is reviewing the incident and will be conducting a full investigation. Investigation? Mike's laugh was harsh. You arrested my wife based on the word of a racist neighbor. What's to investigate? The responding officers followed protocol. Mike's voice rose. Protocol is to verify identity, not to arrest someone for being the wrong color in their own neighborhood. Sarah put a hand on her husband's arm. Mike, let's just go home. No. Mike's voice was steel. This doesn't end here. They humiliated you, Sarah. They treated you like a criminal. That's not okay. As they walked toward the exit, Sarah caught sight of Margaret Whitmore through the glass doors. She was pacing in the parking lot, apparently waiting for them. Oh, hell no, Mike muttered, but Sarah was already pushing through the doors. Mrs. Martinez. Margaret called out, her voice high and strained. I need to speak with you. Sarah stopped, turning to face her tormentor. Up close, Margaret looked smaller somehow, less formidable than she had a few hours ago. Her perfect hair was mussed, her makeup smeared, and her eyes were red-rimmed. I don't think we have anything to discuss, Sarah said calmly. Please, I just need to explain. Explain what? Mike stepped forward, his voice dangerous. Explain how you got my wife arrested for being brown. Explain how you turned her homecoming into a nightmare. I made a mistake, Margaret said, her voice breaking. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. From what? Sarah asked. From me? From people like me. No, it wasn't like that. I didn't recognize you. You didn't recognize me because you never bothered to actually meet me, Sarah said. In 2 years of living next door, you've never once introduced yourself. You've never said hello. You've never acknowledged that I exist. That's not true. It is true. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. You created a fantasy version of me in your head, blonde, white, safe. When the real me showed up, you couldn't handle it. Margaret's face crumpled. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. You meant every bit of it, Mike said coldly. You saw a Latina woman and you assumed she was a criminal. You called the police. You insisted she was lying even when she showed you ID. You filmed her arrest. Like it was entertainment. I was scared you were racist, Sarah said simply. And now you're facing the consequences. Margaret looked around desperately, as if seeking support from the empty parking lot. What do you want from me? I said I was sorry. I want you to understand what you've done, Sarah said. I want you to realize that your actions have consequences. And I want you to face those consequences. Are you going to sue me? Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Sarah exchanged a look with Mike. We are going to explore all of our options. As they walked away, Margaret called out one last time. Mrs. Martinez. Sarah. Please, I have children. I have a family. I can't lose everything over this. Sarah turned back, her expression unreadable. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy mine. The ride home was quiet. Mike drove while Sarah stared out the window at the familiar streets of her neighborhood. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The sanctuary of home had been violated, the safety of her own street compromised. The neighbors are talking, Mike said finally. Jim called everyone he could think of. Most people are on your side. Most people, Sarah repeated. What about the others? There are always others, Mike said grimly. But they are outnumbered. When they pulled into their driveway, Sarah's duffel bag was still scattered across the concrete where she dropped it. Her keys were still on the porch, glinting in the lamplight. The physical evidence of her humiliation. I'll get it, Mike said, but Sarah was already out of the car. She gathered her belongings slowly, methodically. Each item felt heavier than it should, her toiletries, her books, her extra uniforms. The weight of what had happened. Sarah. Mike's voice was gentle. You okay? She looked at him, this man who'd stood by her through deployment after deployment, who'd held her when she cried about the things she'd seen in Afghanistan, who'd driven through the night to be with her when she needed him most. I'm going to destroy her, she said quietly. What? Margaret Whitmore. I'm going to destroy her completely. Sarah's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. She thought she could humiliate me, ruin my homecoming, treat me like a criminal in my own neighborhood. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood in the witness box of the Federal District Court in Charlotte, North Carolina, facing the woman who had tried to destroy her life. Margaret Sullivan, her real name finally restored, sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her once perfect hair now gray at the roots, her face gaunt from months in federal detention. Sergeant Martinez, the prosecutor said, can you identify the defendant? Yes, sir. That's Margaret Sullivan, also known as Margaret Whitmore. My former neighbor. And can you tell the court what happened on the evening of March 15th? Sarah's testimony was calm, precise, devastating. She recounted every detail of her arrest, every moment of humiliation, every second of standing in handcuffs on her own driveway while Margaret filmed her degradation. But this trial wasn't just about civil rights violations. Margaret was facing charges in 3 states for crimes spanning over a decade. The Children's Charity in Florida. The Elderly Investors in Georgia. The Veterans Assistance Fund in South Carolina. Millions of dollars stolen from the most vulnerable people in society. Mrs. Sullivan, the prosecutor continued, after learning about Sergeant Martinez's military service, did you show any remorse for your actions? Objection, Margaret's public defender called out weakly. He'd been trying to negotiate a plea deal for months, but Margaret had refused every offer, insisting she was the victim. Overruled. The defendant's state of mind is relevant to the civil rights charges. Sarah looked directly at Margaret. She showed no remorse whatsoever. Even After learning I was a combat veteran, she continued to insist I was a criminal. She told me I didn't belong in her neighborhood. Margaret's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook him off. Suddenly, she stood up. "Your Honor, I need to speak. Mrs. Sullivan, please sit down and let your attorney know. I've been silent long enough." Margaret's voice carried the same shrill quality that had echoed across Oakwood Drive 6 months ago. "This woman has destroyed my life. She's turned everyone against me. She's the real criminal here." The judge banged his gavel. "Mrs. Sullivan, you will sit down immediately or be held in contempt. She came into our neighborhood and changed everything. She brought chaos and violence. I was protecting people." "Protecting them from what?" Sarah called out, unable to remain silent. "From people like you." Margaret screamed, spinning to face her. "From people who don't belong, who bring their problems and their attitudes and their what, Margaret? Their brown skin. Their service to their country." The courtroom erupted. Margaret's lawyer was trying to physically restrain his client while the judge pounded his gavel and called for order. "She's dangerous." Margaret continued to scream. "All of you are too blind to see it. She's manipulated you all. I'm the victim here. I'm the one who's been persecuted." "Mrs. Sullivan," the judge's voice boomed. "You are in contempt of court. Bailiff, remove the defendant." As the bailiffs approached, Margaret's composure finally shattered completely. "You want to know the truth? Fine. I hate her. I hate everything she represents. I hate that she thinks she belongs in my neighborhood. I hate that you all believe her lies." The bailiffs grabbed her arms, but Margaret wasn't finished. "I'm not sorry. Do you hear me? I'm not sorry for anything I did. She deserved everything that happened to her. They all deserve it. Every last one of them." As they dragged her from the courtroom, Margaret's voice echoed off the walls, "I was right. I was right about all of them." The silence that followed was deafening. The verdict came 3 hours later. Guilty on all counts. 25 years to life in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. Sarah sat in the gallery as the sentence was read, Mike's hand in hers. She felt no satisfaction, no triumph. Just a hollow sense of completion. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. "Sergeant Martinez, how do you feel about the verdict?" "Justice was served," Sarah said simply. "Not just for me, but for all of Margaret Sullivan's victims. Do you have any message for other service members who might face similar discrimination?" Sarah looked directly into the camera. "Don't be silent. Don't accept it. And don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong in the country you swore to defend." The civil settlement came 2 weeks later. The city of Maplewood agreed to pay Sarah $2.3 million for the false arrest and civil rights violations. The money would fund a legal defense foundation for military families facing discrimination. But the real victory had come in the form of policy changes. The Maplewood Police Department implemented new training on implicit bias and proper identification procedures. The City Council passed an ordinance making false reporting a misdemeanor with mandatory sensitivity training. Margaret Sullivan's house, the one she'd illegally purchased using stolen charity funds, was seized by the federal government. The proceeds went to victims' compensation funds in 3 states. 1 year after her arrest, Sarah received a letter. It was from Margaret, written from the Federal Women's Correctional Facility in Alabama. "Mrs. Martinez, I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. My lawyer says I should apologize if I want any chance at appeal, but that's not why I'm writing. I want you to know that I still believe I was right. You didn't belong in Maplewood Estates. You changed the character of the neighborhood. You brought attention and chaos and problems that we never had before. But I also want you to know that I understand now why everyone sided with you. It wasn't because you were right. It was because you were smarter than me. You played the game better. You had better allies, better resources, better lawyers. I'm not apologizing. I'm acknowledging that you won. The other inmates here think I'm crazy when I tell them my story. They can't understand why I did what I did. They keep asking me what you did to me personally. They don't understand that it wasn't personal. It was principle. You represented everything wrong with this country. The way things are changing, the way people like you are taking over places that used to be safe and predictable and white. I know I can't say that in court. I know I can't say that to the parole board. But I can say it to you. I hope you're happy with what you've accomplished. I hope destroying my life was worth it. Margaret Sullivan, federal inmate number 47291. And Sarah read the letter twice, then handed it to Mike. She still doesn't get it, he said after reading it. No, Sarah agreed. She doesn't. And she never will. That evening, Sarah stood in her backyard, looking at the house next door. A young black family had moved in, the Washingtons, both doctors, with 2 small children. They'd introduced themselves the day they moved in, and Sarah had welcomed them with homemade cookies and warnings about the quirks of the neighborhood. The kids next door love your flowers, Mike said, joining her on the deck. They remind me why I served, Sarah said. Not for the Margaret Sullivans of the world, but for families like the Washingtons. For kids who should grow up in a country where they belong everywhere. Her phone buzzed with a text from Major Williams, promotion ceremony scheduled for next month. Congratulations, Staff Sergeant Martinez. Another text from David Chen, settlement funds have established the Martinez Military Family Legal Defense Foundation. First case accepted this morning, Marine family in Texas facing housing discrimination. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. Margaret Sullivan had tried to destroy her life because she believed Sarah didn't belong. Instead, she'd given Sarah a platform to ensure that every military family would know they belonged everywhere. The irony was perfect. In trying to exclude Sarah from her community, Margaret had made her a symbol of inclusion for the entire country. 2 years later, Sarah Martinez stood before a joint session of Congress, testifying about discrimination against military families. The Martinez Act, requiring federal civil rights training for all local law enforcement agencies, passed unanimously. In her closing statement, she looked directly into the cameras and spoke to every Margaret Sullivan watching, to those who believe that some Americans are more American than others, who think that service and sacrifice matter less than skin color or country of origin, who believe they can decide who belongs in their neighborhoods or their country. You're wrong. You've always been wrong. And we will never stop proving you wrong. The foundation Sarah established with her settlement money went on to handle over 400 cases of discrimination against military families. They won 97% of them. Margaret Sullivan served 12 years before dying of a heart attack in federal prison. She never recanted her statements. She never apologized. And she never understood that her hatred had created something far more powerful than her bigotry could ever destroy. On the day Margaret died, Sarah was speaking at a military family conference in San Diego. When she learned of her former neighbor's death, she felt no satisfaction, no vindication. Just sadness for a life wasted on hate. But that evening, as she read thank you letters from families the foundation had helped, a Puerto Rican Army captain in Alabama, a Somali refugee turned Marine in Minnesota, a trans Air Force sergeant in Texas, Sarah understood the true meaning of victory. Margaret Sullivan had wanted to build walls. Instead, she had inspired the construction of bridges. She had wanted to exclude. Instead, she had created inclusion. She had wanted to destroy. Instead, she had built something eternal. The woman. Martinez had learned a lot about warfare in Afghanistan, but the most important lesson wasn't about tactics or weapons, it was about patience. The enemy always reveals their weaknesses if you watch long enough. Margaret Whitmore was about to discover that her new enemy had been watching very carefully. It started at 6 a.m. the next morning. Sarah sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, a legal pad, and her laptop, methodically building her case. Mike had left for work after spending the night alternating between rage and concern, but Sarah's anger had crystallized into something much more dangerous, a plan. Her phone buzzed. A text from her commanding officer, heard about the situation. Legal office wants to speak with you. This could be a federal civil rights case. Sarah smiled grimly. She'd been hoping for that. The doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. Sarah opened it to find a man in an expensive suit standing on her porch, briefcase in hand. Mrs. Martinez. I'm David Chen, attorney with Morrison, Chen and Associates. Jim Patterson called me last night. I specialize in civil rights cases. I haven't hired a lawyer yet, Sarah said. First consultation is free. And after what I heard happened to you, I'm very interested in taking this case. Chen's expression was serious. May I come in? Sarah led him to the living room, where he spread out a series of documents on her coffee table. I've already filed a complaint with the Department of Justice, Chen said. False arrest based on racial profiling is a federal crime. But that's just the beginning. What do you mean? Mrs. Whitmore violated several laws last night. Filing a false police report, making false statements to law enforcement, potentially harassment and intimidation. Then there's the civil side, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation if she's been talking to neighbors about you being a criminal. Sarah leaned back in her chair. How much trouble is she in? Federal charges could mean up to 5 years in prison. Civil damages could run into the hundreds of thousands. Chen's smile was sharp. But there's something else. I did some research on your neighbor this morning. He pulled out a thick folder. Margaret Whitmore, age 52, unemployed, lives off alimony from her ex-husband. She's been involved in 17 different complaints with the city in the past 3 years. Noise complaints, code violations, harassment of delivery drivers, disputes with contractors. So she's a serial complainer. She's a documented problem. But here's the interesting part, she's also the treasurer of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. Sarah's eyebrows rose. And I pulled the HOA financial records. Public information. Mrs. Whitmore has been very busy with the association's funds. Chen spread out a series of bank statements and ledgers. See these payments. Neighborhood beautification, security consulting, administrative fees. All paid to companies that don't seem to exist. She's been stealing. That's what it looks like. About $40,000 over the past 18 months. Chen's smile widened. I think Mrs. Whitmore's problems are just beginning. As if summoned by their conversation, Margaret Whitmore appeared at Sarah's front door. Through the window, Sarah could see her pacing on the porch, clearly working up the courage to knock. Don't answer it, Chen advised. Anything she says can be used against her. But Sarah was already moving toward the door. I want to hear this. Margaret looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes were bloodshot. She'd clearly been crying. Mrs. Martinez, please. I need to talk to you. Through my lawyer, Sarah said, gesturing to Chen. Margaret's face went pale. You hired a lawyer. Federal civil rights attorney, Chen said, stepping forward. David Chen, Morrison, Chen and Associates. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to advise you that anything you say can and will be used against you in court. Court? Margaret's voice cracked. This is getting out of hand. I made a mistake. I apologized. You committed multiple felonies, Chen said calmly. Apologies don't erase federal crimes. I'm not a criminal. Margaret's voice rose to a familiar shriek. I'm a pillar of this community. I've lived here for 12 years. I volunteer at the library. I organize the neighborhood watch. You also embezzled $40,000 from the Homeowners Association, Chen said quietly. The color drained from Margaret's face completely. What? Maplewood Estates HOA account. Mysterious payments to shell companies. Should we call the other board members and discuss it? Margaret swayed on her feet. Oh. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Chen's voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. Mrs. Whitmore, you're in serious trouble. Federal civil rights charges, grand theft, fraud, you're looking at potentially a decade in prison. Please, Margaret whispered. I have children. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy an innocent woman's life. Sarah said, her voice cold. But don't worry, Margaret. I'm just getting started. The phone calls began that afternoon. Sarah's strategy was methodical and thorough, just like the intelligence operations she'd planned in Afghanistan. Every contact she'd made, every favor she was owed, every resource at her disposal. First, she called Major Patricia Williams, the legal officer at Fort Bragg. I need to discuss a potential civil rights violation involving a service member. Go ahead, Sergeant. Last night, I was arrested for attempting to enter my own home. The complainant specifically cited my ethnicity as grounds for suspicion. Jesus Christ, Martinez. Are you telling me you were arrested for being brown in your own neighborhood? That's exactly what I'm telling you. This is going to the Pentagon. This is going to the fucking Pentagon. Next, she called her old squad leader, now a recruiter in Charlotte. Rodriguez, I need a favor. You know anyone at the local news stations? What's this about, Martinez? Someone needs to learn that you don't fuck with the 82nd Airborne. The story broke on the evening news. Channel 7's investigative reporter, Sandra Kim, had done her homework. The segment opened with Sarah's military photo, her deployment history, her commendations. Then it cut to bodycam footage from the arrest, Margaret's shrill voice, Sarah's calm responses, the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. A decorated combat veteran was arrested last night for trying to enter her own home, Kim reported. The complainant, neighbor Margaret Whitmore, insisted that Sergeant Sarah Martinez was an imposter, despite being shown military identification and other documentation. The segment included interviews with other neighbors, all speaking glowingly of Sarah and expressing shock at Margaret's actions. It showed the scatter of Sarah's belongings on the driveway, the American flag by her door, the honor guard certificate hanging in her window. But the real bombshell came at the end. Channel 7 News has learned that Margaret Whitmore, the woman who filed the false complaint, is under investigation for embezzling funds from the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association. Sources close to the investigation say the amount could exceed $40,000. Margaret's phone started ringing immediately. HOA board members, neighbors, her ex-husband's lawyer. Each call brought fresh horror as her world collapsed around her. Margaret, what the hell is this about stolen money? Demanded Bob Peterson, the HOA president. The news is saying you embezzled association funds. I didn't steal anything. Margaret protested. Those were legitimate expenses. $40,000 in expenses. To companies that don't exist. Are you out of your mind? Oh. I can explain everything. You better be able to explain it to the police, because I'm calling them right now. Meanwhile, Sarah was making another call. This one to her old platoon sergeant, now working as a paralegal in Charlotte. Jackson, I need you to run a background check on someone. Full workup, criminal history, civil suits, financial records, everything. Who's the target? Margaret Whitmore, DOB the 15th of March, 1971, last known address 1249, Oakwood Drive. What did she do? She messed with the wrong soldier. The background check revealed a pattern of behavior stretching back years. Margaret had been involved in disputes with 3 different homeowners associations, 2 employment discrimination suits, both settled out of court, and a restraining order filed by her ex-husband's new girlfriend. She's a serial litigant, Jackson reported. The kind of person who sues everyone and everything. But here's the interesting part, she's also been broke for the past 2 years. Alimony ran out, no job, maxed out credit cards. Hence the embezzlement, Sarah said. Exactly. She's been living off stolen HOA funds. By 8 p.m., Margaret Whitmore's life was in free fall. The HOA had called an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove her as treasurer and file criminal charges. Her ex-husband had called to warn her that he was considering revoking her visitation rights with their children if she was charged with a crime. 3 of her remaining friends had called to distance themselves from her. But the worst call came from her mother. Margaret and Whitmore, what is this I'm seeing on the news? Mom, I can explain. You had a soldier arrested. A woman who's been serving our country. She didn't look like what? Like what you wanted her to look like. Margaret, I raised you better than this. Mom, please, I'm ashamed of you. Ashamed and disgusted. Don't. Call me until you've figured out how to make this right. The line went dead. Margaret sat in her living room, surrounded by the wreckage of her life. Through the window, she could see Sarah's house,